I'm very glad to have with me a master, an Armenian in America. I'm today happy to have interviewing in a Nadi podcast the master, Ara Dinkjian. Welcome, master.
Fadil, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for accepting the time. And I think today we are going to have a great exposure to your experience and a lot of things that we are going to learn from and get excited about. Master, I would like to start with the biography.
Well,
Yeah.
sure. I was born in 1958
Mhm.
in New Jersey to Armenian American parents. My father was born in Paris.
Mhm.
My mother was born in Lyon. Both of them born in France, but they met here in New York.
Mhm.
My grandparents on my father's side are from Diyarbakir, which is Eastern Turkey, and
Uh-huh.
on my mother's side from Harput, also
Mhm.
Eastern Turkey. And
Mhm.
I had the trip of my life when I took my father for the first time, and we went to the old country to see the villages of our ancestors. That was about 15, 16 years ago.
Mhm.
Since then, not only we've been back a few times, but we've also performed there. My father being a very well-known Armenian folk and liturgical singer. His name is Onnik Dinkjian.
Mhm.
So that being the case, I was brought up in a very musical home.
Mhm.
I didn't know that homes were any different. I thought everybody woke up singing and playing instruments and went to bed like that also. So
Yeah.
music was just part of our language. And
Mhm.
it seems that even as an infant, I was more interested in those sounds, if they were coming from the record or from the radio or from my father's mouth or from when we had people over and they would spontaneously start to sing. Or if we
Mhm.
would go, let's say, for example, to a wedding,
Mhm.
all my parents had to do is put my little baby carriage next to the band. And for the next 6 hours, I would be okay. Just leave me alone. Let me watch the magic that was happening as I was trying to understand what is this and how can I become a part of that world.
Mhm.
It was really, Fadil, nothing that I ever chose. It seems
Mhm.
that I was programmed for this, and
Mhm.
I'm very grateful. I am now 62 years old, and I wake up every morning anxious to hear something I haven't heard before,
Mhm.
or to learn something new, or to write a piece that I haven't written before. Or, in other words, my hunger is still there, which started as an infant.
Interesting. Interesting. I would like to expand more on the biography if we go for the way you started with the music instruments at home to be an Armenian in the States.
Yes, the part about being Armenian is really all encompassing, and I say that because,
Mm.
again, before I was aware or conscious, it seems that all of our friends, all of course, relatives, but everybody that we associated with was part of that Armenian American community.
Mm.
A lot of it centered around the church. My father is a deacon, which means he served on the altar singing the religious music. And when I was 13, I became the church organist and
Mm.
continued that post for over 45 years.
Wow.
So the religious music, actually, to be honest,
Mm.
any sound, any
Mm.
music
Mm.
was fascinating to me, and I wanted to be part of it. Uh,
Yes.
so, uh, yeah, I started as a little child banging on the table,
Mm.
and my mother even told me that when I was a little boy in church, if they were singing a religious chant that had a rhythm, I would
Mm.
start to bang on the chair. And my mother would tell me, no, you cannot do that. You cannot do that, you know. So they got me a little darbuka as my first instrument. And that was really the beginning. I wanted every instrument. It didn't matter whether it was Eastern or Western. It didn't matter if it was a string, a percussion, a wind, or a keyboard. I wanted to explore everything. My parents, to their eternal credit, bought a piano, bought me a guitar. I started to take clarinet lessons in the school. And it just went on and on. But the most impactful instrument story in my life was that when I was about 5 or 6 years old, my parents explained to me that I could go anywhere in the house except into their bedroom. And why? Because there was an oud in the bedroom. And they warned me it's a very delicate instrument and you cannot touch that. You can touch anything else in the house, but you cannot touch that. It seems, I don't know if they did that intentionally or what, but you know, child psychology, you tell a child you cannot touch that. That's the only thing they want to touch. So of course I became very curious, you know, what is this thing I'm not allowed to touch? And the truth is, I remember as a 5 or 6 year old running into the room once and plucking one string and running out, hoping I would not get caught. I did not get caught. So maybe a week later, I became a little more brave and I plucked 2 or 3 strings, you know, and listened. Well, as months and years went by, I became more and more brave. My mother would be sewing in the living room. My father would be at work. He doesn't come home until 6 o'clock. After a few years, I'm sitting on my parents' bedroom floor. I have the oud in my hand and I'm starting to figure out some things slowly. Well, one day my father came home at 4:30.
Wow, unexpected.
Unexpected. I did not realize he was in the room listening to me. When he walked in, his first reaction was, "What are you doing? I told you." "Oh, you're playing?" He saw that I was respecting the instrument and I had achieved something. And I guess that's how I escaped being punished for not having listened to them. And from then on, I was allowed to play the oud. And this became a fascination with me that continues to this day.
Yes. But how did you come to learn the oud on your own? Did you had a chance to meet a teacher or maybe get some help or support like your father?
Yeah. You know, the answer to the question, Fadil, it depends on who you are and what you believe in. And I say that because I'm not taking credit for what I have achieved, because like I said before, it seemed to have been programmed in me. No, I did not have a formal teacher. But at the same time, I can tell you that everything I heard and every record and even the birds singing outside and the windshield wipers on the car making a certain beat, and virtually everything is my teacher. But to get more specific, at a very young age, I discovered that my father had a few of we call them 78s, the old records, gramophone records that turned very fast on the wind-up machine. These are the earliest, other than maybe cylinders, these are the earliest documentation of our musics. And he had a few of those old records. I became absolutely obsessed, eventually understanding that this is the roots of our music, of the instruments. And I have been collecting those records ever since. I am now beyond 5,000 Armenian
Wow.
and Turkish 78 RPM old gramophone records.
Wow.
And my feeling about it is that I saved them from being thrown in the garbage, because the truth is, at the time I started collecting over 50 years ago, the old people who had them were no longer listening to them. Their children, the following generation, was not interested in them. And they're taking up a lot of space, and they're old junk. And I gladly took them. And I feel like I saved them from being destroyed.
Yes.
Now, of course, it has become a little more fashionable and even monetarily profitable to have these old records, but that was never my motivation. My motivation was to learn the foundation of the cultures. And it's not just Armenian. It could be Arab, it could be Turk, it could be Greek, it could be anything. To hear the foundation of our ancestors playing this music, playing these instruments, because as you know, as time goes on, yes, we do become more refined, but we also lose a certain authenticity.
Right.
So I figured out early on that if I could hear the early music, I could understand the development and where it has come to this day. Now, my intention was never to try to recreate the past, because I believe that is impossible. I'm in America. It's 1970, for example. It is not Istanbul in 1910. So I cannot be something I'm not. I cannot feel something that I'm not experiencing. But I could still learn from the masters through their recordings to the best of my ability by listening closely. Yes, we start by imitating.
Yes.
This is how we all start. But I could never be Yorgo Bajanos. I could never be Fadi Datrash. I could never be Udi Hrant, etc., etc. I have to, the goal has to be to discover, who am I? What do I have to add to this history? You don't do that early on. You spend most of your formative years learning the history of your instrument, of your music, of your culture.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, you start to discover certain unique things about yourself. And as you nurture those unique aspects, maybe you start to discover a unique musical personality.
Interesting. I think we will need to stop at this point, but I need to go back to a previous point where you mentioned, Ara, about the need to observe, because this is a very delicate skill, right? Where we listen to these phonographs at the very early stage, where you have no teacher or instructor, and you need to understand without a video or a picture what these masters are doing. Plus, the knowledge about makams, the sayer, the all the culture of the music that you are listening to, provided that you are listening to a big family of culture, the makam family, or maybe other kinds of musics too. So, I mean, tell me about this skill and how does it nurture and grow?
It's a wonderful question, Fadil. And you made another point, which is that I did not limit myself to makam music. I will get back to your question, but let me at least at this point say that because I was born and raised in America, whether it's in the house or not, you're going to hear the Beatles.
Yes.
You're going to hear Western classical music. You're going to hear jazz. You're going to hear all kinds of music. And I never differentiated between them.
Yeah.
To me, it was all a sonic wonderland that I wanted to be part of. I did not make categories. To me, it was just music. But to return to your question regarding how does one learn without a teacher, or how does one observe?
Yeah.
I have always felt that the musician's job is not to play, but it is to hear what most people don't hear. If you're able to do that, then you know what to play to make the music better. The ability to play in tune, or to play fast, or to play loud or slow or whatever is a technical ability, but if you don't put it in its best context in the music that's happening, then you're not improving that musical moment.
Right.
And this may sound strange, but I'll give you an example of one of the ways that I realized this. In America, there was a TV show about two policemen that would drive their police car looking for any trouble that they can fix. And whenever they saw trouble, immediately they would take their radio and tell the home base, we are between 32nd and 33rd Street. And there's a fire, we're going in. And I was always impressed that at every moment, they knew exactly where they were. Now, as a musician, as we're playing, let's say there's 4 or 5 musicians and we're all playing.
Yeah.
At any moment, you should be able to stop me and ask me right now, what is the kanun playing? And I should be able to tell you he's trilling in the upper register. Okay, what is the violin doing? The violin was not playing just now. In other words, you have to be aware of what is happening so that you know what to play. In other words, to hear what most people don't hear. I believe this is the job of the musicians. Once you hear this, maybe the best thing for you to do is not play anything at all. Or maybe the best thing for you to do is play in the low register because nobody's playing down there right now. We need that bottom. Et cetera, et cetera. So this is how I began to train myself. Regarding the old records and not having a teacher, it took a lot of time and imagination, because sometimes, for example, the 78, we say 78 RPM, revolutions per minute. That was not a standard speed until the late 20s, which means if you have an earlier record, the proper playback speed might be 72 or 86. So I'll be listening and the oud is in B flat. And I would be confused. So I had to start to hear these things, understand these things, that, oh, maybe there's a technical issue. But eventually you start to hear, well, he's playing an open string and it's B flat. So either he tuned higher or the speed is incorrect. So there's universes to learn, you know. It's endless. And I'm trying to figure out which string is he playing, which fingers could he be using, how is he using his risha, his mazrab, to pick that phrase. And you know what? I'm still trying to find those answers, you know.
Interesting. And Ara, you mentioned about the first years, maybe, or a decade or two. The musician has to learn the history of the instrument, learning about his instrument, music, and so on, till he discovers himself. Would you please, clarify and describe the process of discovering oneself?
Well, when I said a musician has to do that, what I
Mm,
really meant was, this is what I believe. Of
mhm,
course, there are musicians who are not interested in the past.
mhm.
They're born with talent, and they move forward from the point where they are. I'm
Yeah.
just telling you my own philosophy, my own approach.
Mhm,
Um, I want to move my instrument, my culture, and my music forward, just a little bit forward.
mhm.
But before I do that, I have to know its history,
Mhm.
because maybe somebody already did this, what I'm doing,
Yes. Right.
or maybe this is breaking all of the rules, and
Mhm.
therefore it is not a direct line.
Mm,
It is not a logical transition to the next
mhm.
step. So I personally want to be aware of all of those things.
Mhm.
Um, and I once tried to teach my children to trust what seemed right to them.
Mm, mhm.
Either uh, I, if you find that girl pretty, my son,
Mm,
and nobody else does, that's
mm,
okay. You think she's pretty, then she's pretty. Trust.
mhm.
My daughter, you don't like that food, you don't have to eat it. That's You don't like it, okay. You have to trust that that is not part of your diet.
Mhm.
The same way as a musician, you can. I personally, and please don't misunderstand. Please don't
Mm,
misunderstand. I don't ask other people their opinion about
mm,
a particular song of mine, or of a performance of mine.
mhm.
I don't ask, because if I ask 10 people, I will get 10 different answers. And what does that do for me other than confuse me?
Mhm.
I have to trust what I hear and what I feel. This is part of discovering who you are. As a matter of
Yes.
fact, when I started my first band, which was called Night Ark,
Mhm.
my father, who is my hero and my idol, not only musically but as a human being, he's
Mhm.
my he's my example.
Mhm.
He said, "What is this music you're doing? What is this
Mhm.
jazz, maz? You don't blend those things. This does not belong. You shouldn't." Okay, but I did it because, without thinking too much, this is what I felt,
Mm,
and it was a crucial step towards discovering who I was and starting my career. Because
mhm.
you know what? My father was not born in America, but I was.
Yeah.
So if I ignore the fact that I'm born in America, I'm not being honest. At
Mhm.
the same time, if I deny my Armenian heritage, culture, and history, I'm not being honest.
Mhm.
So when I play music, when I write music, to various degrees, those are the elements that should come through if
Mhm.
I'm being sincere about who I am.
Yeah. Mm,
That's who I am.
mhm.
You don't like the music? That's fine. I have to make myself like it.
Mhm.
It's like taking a picture. I have to take a picture of who I am when I'm presenting myself musically. Those
Mm,
people who relate to it, who like it, those become your audience.
mhm.
Those people who don't like it, that's not your audience. You cannot please everybody.
That's right. That's right. Interesting. I think this is a big question. We will come to it in a different way later on in our discussion.
Okay.
But touching on this, how come you were not dragged to the music flow or music fashion or whatever mainstream at the time? Because you are not playing Western music. I know that you did the organ for 45 years. but you do also play the Eastern and Makam family type of music.
Why did not, are you asking me why I did not become a typical American musician?
Yeah, for example, yes.
That's a great
Because
question.
that's also good for the business, right? You can make money off that or a living.
Yeah, when it comes to making money and thinking like that, I'm a disaster. I never, you know, Fadil, if I wanted to make money, I would not play the oud. If I wanted to make money, I would not play makam music. I would be doing something else. But like I said, I did not think. I just followed what was attractive to me, what made me hungry. And what made me hungry was these instruments and these sounds. And you know, I'll tell you a very personal story which may illustrate what I was trying to teach my children. My father was an orphan. He does not remember his father at all because he was maybe 2 when his father died. Back then, if the man dies and you do not have money, a single mother with 2 children cannot support her children. So my grandmother started to become, let's say, insane with worry, and she was institutionalized. And she died when my father was about 5 or 6, so he barely remembers her. The only thing he remembers about her was that she would sing lullabies to her 2 children for them to sleep in the Anatolian makam style. We call them maya or uzunava. That he remembers. Now, when I was about 20, my father and I went to France to do a concert for the French Armenian community. And an old lady came up to my father and said, I knew your real parents, your biological parents. Oh my God. She invited us over so she would tell us whatever she knew. So of course we canceled everything we had the next morning and we went to her apartment for coffee. And of course, I'm not saying anything because this is my father's moment now to learn about his parents. I'm just observing.
Yeah.
And the old lady said to my father, oh, your mother had such a beautiful voice and she would sing Maya, and we would bring the coffee because you could not even afford coffee. We would bring the coffee and tell her, Zora, you just sing, we'll make the coffee. And my father started to cry because it confirmed what he remembered about his mother, that she had a beautiful voice. And of course, my father has a beautiful voice. And then the old lady continued. She said to my father, and you know, your father played the oud. When she said that, I broke down and started weeping because here I am, an American born in New Jersey. Why do I want to play the oud? Are you stupid? Play the guitar, play the drums, get some girls, get some money. But I wanted to play the oud. And until that moment where that old lady told me that my grandfather played the oud, I did not really understand why. But Fadil, that blessed woman gave me the lesson of my lifetime, which is we are carrying physically the blood and the DNA
Mhm.
and the characteristics of our ancestors.
Mhm.
It is in us, even if we never met them. Maybe,
Mhm.
you know what? Maybe I talk exactly the way my grandfather talks. Maybe
Mhm.
I walk this way and he walked. I don't know. But
Yeah.
he played the oud. It was the greatest gift I have ever
Mm.
received because it confirmed everything that I felt. She told me in her own way, Ara, you're feeling the right thing. You're following the right path. This is who you are.
Wow. That's a great wisdom. Really.
So that's what I was trying to teach my children, to trust,
Mhm.
because
Mm.
you may live and die and never understand why you
Mm.
feel a certain way, but you have to trust
Yeah.
that it is who you are.
Interesting. Ara, would you please talk to us about the heaven you are in now, around you?
I'm really glad you said that
Yeah.
because um, regarding what happens after we die, as Christians, we're supposed to believe we're going to heaven and we're going to meet the Lord.
Mm.
That may be true. I don't
Mhm.
know. I don't know. But
Yeah.
I have found heaven on earth
Mm.
through love of mankind,
Mhm.
my friends and my family.
Mhm.
But also, I'm sorry if it sounds cheap, but I love books and records and instruments. This is my drug
Yeah.
because it expands my mind. Uh,
Mm.
it fills the holes in my heart,
Mhm.
and I'm surrounded by books and records, the wisdom of the past, and I try to embrace myself and learn from it every day.
Mhm. Interesting. Interesting. I think it's time for a break. Let's listen to a record
Sure.
of your choice. What would you advise to listen to? Let's have a selection of the old records.
Uh,
Mhm.
would you like to listen to Yorgo Bajanos?
Mhm. All right, listen to Yorgo Bajanos then.
Okay.
Yeah. Master, let's go back to the music genres that you lived and learned. Let's just give an insight about them and then also touch on the various instruments you played.
Mhm. Well, like I said, I growing up, I never
Mm,
divided or categorized the
mm,
genres of music. That's really more of a marketing device, so they know how to sell it, how to market it. And
mhm,
musicians have always rejected those categorizations, by the way, always.
mhm.
As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, the great Duke Ellington said, "My music is not jazz." And
Mm.
they said, "Well, what is it?" He said, "It's my music."
Oh.
Yeah. Uh, and by saying that, he's allowing himself to bring
Mhm,
in blues or gospel or classical or anything, and it still is his music. And I feel
mm,
very much that way.
mhm,
America is a very interesting and unique place because, as you know, it's inhabited by people from around the world.
mhm,
So it has incredible diversity of cultures.
mhm.
And I hope one day you come to my home, Fadil. You're invited and you're welcome. So I show you my record collection. Although I do concentrate on Armenian and Turkish because that's my ancestry,
Mhm.
believe me, you will see records from virtually every country in the world,
I would love
inclu-
to really. Yeah.
including uh, bird songs, wolf songs,
Mm,
songs of the whales in the ocean. And I
mhm.
even have a record of Marcel Marceau, who was the silent mime. The
Oh.
record is 19 minutes of silence and 2 minutes of applause. I mean, I'm insane with just experimentation and experiencing everything when it comes to
Mm,
sound. It's
mhm,
all for me very, very interesting.
mhm. These are like archaeological sound evidences, Ara, where we are not worried about, an understanding of some music that maybe we don't have any trace of. We can just plug it in or just put it on and play it and hear history, hear the way they move, the way they pluck, the tuning of the instrument, everything. This is something so delicious and so, like a big obsession. I mean, the way you went on to this level of collection, to maybe wake up every day and look for a new record. Maybe tell us about this.
Yes, my routine these days is I wake up, I pour myself a coffee, and I
Hmm.
go to eBay on the
Hmm.
computer looking for something I've never heard before.
Hmm.
Um, but I'd like to make another point, Fadil, which
Hmm.
which is more important than amassing a big collection.
Yeah.
Uh, and the point is this: this the process of music, the experiencing music,
Hmm.
is what ties us all together as humanity.
Hmm.
It's been going on since the beginning of time,
Hmm.
and it's one of our, I don't know if I should say it this way, but it's one of our only hopes
Hmm.
when when we find ways to divide each other or uh, to define how we're different. Music
Hmm.
is one of those things that reminds us of what it means to be human.
Hmm.
And in that way, it's, I believe, one of our most precious gifts because I can hear somebody play a couple of notes and it touches my heart, and they're on
Hmm.
the other side of the world, and
Yes.
and they're touching me. They're
Hmm.
they're reaching out and holding my hand, and I, with my ears, I'm going back to them. And
Hmm.
actually, it's what brought you and I together.
Yes.
I don't know you, and yet we're sitting here very comfortable and very trusting of each other, and we have music to thank for bringing us together.
Yeah.
It really is a precious gift. And I think I had mentioned to you, there have been times in history, and there have been certain cultures where to be a musician is a derogatory, low class designation. There are even negative words to describe musicians in certain cultures.
Yes.
Maybe I'm naive, but I'm extremely proud to be part of a great history of musicians. I'm not putting myself at their level necessarily. I'm just saying, whether we like it or not, we're the ones who are alive today with our instruments in our hand. And I'm very proud because it is a unifying force.
Yeah, so true. What about the community in New York, the music community? Let's talk about it, from the time you started being a musician.
Sure. My particular experience was in specifically the Armenian American community, which I mentioned before meant church on Sunday morning. And by the way, our church service is 2.5 hours long, and everything is sung. So 2.5 hours of melody. That's why I loved it so much, because it's music, We also had folk dance groups, both children and adults, where we would wear the ancient costumes of the villages of our ancestors, and we would recreate the folk dances from each of the villages. And we would perform those. I myself always refused to dance. And so therefore, as a 5-year-old, I was playing the darbuka. I would play the music, but I would not dance. And a very interesting thing has happened. There was terrible events 100 years ago, World War I time, that happened to the Armenian people, specifically in Turkey.
Yeah.
We were either wiped out or had to run. And it's really why I'm born in America. Because the truth is, after I went back and saw those villages and towns, I understood that if there was not war, there was no reason to leave. We had everything, mountains and lakes and rivers and gardens. It was paradise. Anyway.
Yeah.
The reason I'm bringing this up is because many Armenians wound up in America. Some from Harput, some from Diyarbakir, some from Erzurum, some from Malatya, some from Urfa, and on and on and on. And each one of them had, for example, their own melody, their own dance. But in America, when the Armenians would gather, they wound up learning each other's dances and melodies. Now, that never happened in Turkey because you were a little more isolated. Each one of you were in your own village. But in America, you all gathered, and the family from Erzurum learned the dance from Urfa, etc., etc. So that when my father and I would perform, and we performed thousands of picnics and weddings and dances, thousands, there would be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Armenians, young and old, all dancing all of the folk dances from the old country. Everybody knew all of them. And we didn't realize how precious that was. It was almost like keeping a dinosaur alive.
Yes.
We were not conscious of how precious what had happened here in America until some people from Turkey came, and I brought them to an Armenian dance that we were playing, and they sat and watched all of the folk dances being danced by these little American kids, little American Armenian kids. They knew all the dances from all the villages. And those people made us realize that what we had done was actually so precious, because they're lost over there. But we kept them alive here, not intentionally, not culturally, oh, we must keep it alive. No, they just got together, let's do our dances, you know. So the Armenian American community was and remains very strong.
Till today.
Still today. I have 3 kids. They are the light of my life. One of them is married to an Armenian. The other, and by the way, she made me a grandfather of twin boys.
Congrats.
Thank you so much. My other daughter is engaged to an Armenian, and my son is going out with an Armenian. So the community remains strong. The language, the food, the music, the history, the literature, the architecture. We're very proud and fortunate.
Interesting. That actually leads me to another question, Ara, which is the connection with the great masters of Armenia, composers and musicians. How is that felt from your perspective today?
I have to make the distinction. The Armenian masters of music, there are, I don't like to make categories, but because my ancestors are from what today is called Turkey, I can tell you that there are many the crucial master composers and musicians. We know this from history, from the old records, from the old books, the compositions that are still being performed today. In most cases, the language is Turkey because that's where they were living. And yet the composers were Armenians. There are also Greek composers and Arab and Jew and you name it. And of course, Turkish. We make that distinction from what was formerly Soviet Armenia and is now an independent Armenia, where we have a whole other group of master composers. And by the way, that music, which is different from the Turkish music, is music that I'm also obsessed with. They use slightly different instrumentation. There is a different approach. It is not the ancient makam system. There is harmony. It's a different approach to music, and yet it makes me feel Armenian all over again. So there are kind of two schools of Armenian masters, both schools of which I am a student.
Can you name some, Master?
Yes, for example, in Turkey, we have Tateos Effendi.
Yeah.
And I know every Arab who loves music has heard that name.
For sure.
His sasemais and his peshrevs and some of his sharkı are still being played today.
Yes.
Yes. And we're still learning from them.
Yeah.
One of my absolute favorite composers, Armenian named Bimen Shen. His real last name was Der Ghazarian, but another great composer. And there are so many more from Turkey. When we talk about Armenian composers, we must mention Gomidas Vartabe. This is, he was an ethnomusicologist. He was a celibate priest. He was a composer. He was a musician. He was a choral leader. He went throughout Turkey and recorded and transcribed the folk songs. He is the Armenian pillar of composers, probably the most important. We also have Sayat Nova, who was a minstrel, a troubadour, an ashuk.
Yes.
These are all, part of our foundation. You've heard some of these names?
Yes, for sure.
Wow.
Not everyone, though. Not everyone. I'm sure there are too many.
Yes. Well, I'm just so happy to see you acknowledging. That's great.
Yes. Ara, one question here is about language versus music. You were born in the States, but you do play the maqam music. If I compare it to the language, it's so native. Do we learn the language in the same way we learn music, or what? Or do you link it back to genes and ancestry, being a descendant from the Armenian tree or trunk?
Well, one thing that finally we have come to understand is that children are capable of learning many languages. There was a time in America, I don't know about the rest of the world, I don't know, maybe you can tell me, but in America, in the 1950s, for example, 1960s, the teachers were telling the parents, do not speak your native language to your children. They have to learn English and it will confuse them. Well, this was terrible, terrible advice, wrong advice, because they have proven that the brain of a child can learn many languages. The older we get, the more difficult it is to learn new languages. So your time to learn languages in a very natural, unconscious way is between 1 and 5. Speak all the languages. This is my advice. So now I tie that into music. I believe if I've accomplished anything, one of my great advantages was that there was so much music in the house as a baby. Just like I speak Armenian fluently, because I grew up listening to that, whether it's makam music or church music or Sayat Nova or Gomidas or Beatles. I heard that every day and it became natural. It did not become something I had to learn and practice. It just became part of my world.
Interesting. And do you see that we learn the language in the same way we learn music, or are they different ways of?
Well, if you don't take advantage of it when you're a child, then I believe we have to learn, whether it's a spoken language or a musical language, we have to learn it in a more academic way, where there are lessons and you must practice, and it becomes a bit of a chore. I never ever considered music a chore, something I have to do. As a matter of fact, just the opposite. I would be playing my instruments until my parents would say, stop, we have to have dinner, that's enough.
Yes.
So while I wasn't a big practicer, I've always been a constant player and explorer.
Interesting. Ara, how about another break? Let's pick another record.
Sure.
An old record, something of your choice.
Okay, let's do Sherif Muhyiddin Targan.
All right. Now I think it's time to talk about uh, one thing that will take us into your music, your compositions, and so on. Having all this obsession with old records might give an impression that you are an old-fashioned or maybe like an imitator, like you mentioned in the beginning. But when we listen to your music, it's so connected to the past, but it is today's. How is that?
Please forgive me, Fadil. I'm not trying to be difficult, but how can it be anything else? I could never sound like they sounded in the 1920s. I could never sound like I was born in Cairo. My only chance is to be honest. And like I said before, if I'm honest, you will hear some West, you will hear some East. Depending on the piece, sometimes a little more East or a little more West. That's not the important part. The important part is the sincerity. I'm not trying to play in a particular category. And you know what, to be honest, here, I'll explain it to you this way. When I was younger, I did not know the technical names of the maqams. I wasn't paying attention to that. I was just trying to make music. And when I would write music, it seems that I was always in this family of maqams, Husseini, Bayati, Ushak, Muhayyer, this family of maqams. Okay. Now, like I said, I did not know those terms back then, but I was writing these songs. Okay. Later, as people would ask me, what maqam is that? And I would have to research to find out what maqam I was playing.
Yeah.
I started to realize that 80% of the songs, the folk songs from Diyarbakir, where my ancestors are from, are in that family of makams. Now, I was not conscious of it. I was not trying to do that. I wasn't thinking of my connection to Diyarbakir. But there it is again. If I was just allowing what's coming natural to happen, I see my history. It's coming through me.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
you did actually. And about being living today's and expressing today's rather than mimicking the old records. You know, sometimes we might be impacted by the massive number of records we listen to. So it will impact our style, it would impact our taste. But that's not very clear when we listen to your recordings and to your albums.
thank you. Thank you. I mean, that feels good. I honestly am not conscious of it, but I do know that when it comes time, well, first comes the writing process. And if I can tell you about that, the only time the writing is really something that makes me happy is when I'm more of an observer rather than in control. Because when I'm in control, then I'm using my brain and I'm thinking, should it go to this note or should it go to that note? And right there, it becomes a calculation instead of an inspiration. But so help me, this is really the truth. My wife knows now, in the middle of the night, if I turn on the light, she knows not to ask me, what's the matter? Are you okay? Because in my dream, I heard a melody and I have music paper next to my bed and I will start to write it. And then I will close the light and go back to sleep. Or I'm in the shower. Forgive me, please. I'm in the shower. I'm washing. And suddenly I hear this melody. I stop the shower. I'm wet. I'm writing on the paper. The paper's getting wet, but I want to quickly write it before I forget it. Fadil, can I at that moment say, oh, I am the great creator of this melody? Or, wow, something came. Where did it come from? I will allow the listener of this interview to decide for themselves. You could say it's coming from God. It's coming from your ancestors. It's coming from you. It's coming from I don't know. But when it comes without warning, I remember I was with my wife. We were in a museum and we were looking at paintings. And suddenly I heard something and I ran to the guard and I said, do you have a piece of paper? What? Do you have a piece of paper, please? Okay. Oh, he gives me, and you never know. You never know when it's going to come. Now, that said, there are times where you might be commissioned to write something and you can sit there and wait for inspiration. And if time is running out, you have to force yourself. Now, I'm a musician. I'm a composer. I know how to force myself to write something, but they're rarely something that I'm really, really happy with afterwards. I can tell it was a bit of a calculation.
Ara, you once told me that composition is nothing but finding music rather than putting down music on paper or what we call composing.
Yes, one of my CDs is called Finding Songs, as opposed to writing or creating songs. Okay. And I say finding because when they come, you know that it's right, as if they have always existed and you found them.
Mhm.
They don't need to be changed. You heard it. It came. It's hard to take credit for something like that.
Mhm.
So I say, I found it.
So you need to keep watching and keep listening and waiting for it to come rather than just engineering a piece or maybe altering what it comes to you, right?
I think it's sort of like, I hope this is not an inappropriate analogy, but
Mm.
when you're a young person and you're wondering, when am I going to meet my wife?
Mhm.
How am I going to meet my wife?
Yeah.
My advice to my children was, you cannot predict or plan it, but you have to remain open.
Mhm.
You have to remain available to when that person comes into your life. It's the same thing with music. I'm not sitting waiting, for the melody to come, but doesn't matter where I am. When it comes, I know I cannot interrupt that moment
Mhm.
because it might not come again for a long time.
True. So we stay tuned then as
Yes,
musicians.
exactly. Exactly right. Exactly right.
Interesting. Ara, what would you pick from your own music to listen to with our audience?
Well, let's start with Picture,
Mm.
which is a piece that came to me
Mhm.
many, many years ago and has been recorded in about a dozen different languages.
Mm.
And I say that not not to call attention to myself, but more to call attention to the power and universality of
Mhm.
music, that diverse cultures can hear a melody and feel human.
Mhm.
And this is one example. On this
Mhm.
piece, I'm playing an instrument called jumbush,
Mm.
not oud.
Yeah,
And if I may tell you the story of this,
please.
um, I had written that piece and I was making my first record with Night Arc. And
Mm.
it was for RCA Records, a big multinational company,
Mm. Yeah.
in the best studios in New York with the best engineers and the best microphones and producers. And okay.
Mhm.
And we made the whole record, and I had that song and I played it on the oud, and I was not happy. And the engineer said, "What's wrong? It sounds good." I said, "I think this is a special song and it needs something special, and we did not get it." He said, "All right, well, tomorrow we can try again." I said, "Okay." I went back to my apartment and I looked in my closet, and there was this instrument there that this Armenian lady had given to me. Her husband had died,
Mm.
and she gave me this. It looked like a fretless banjo. I didn't know what it was, and I
Mhm.
had never played it.
Mhm.
And it was in the closet, and I took it and I tuned it up, and I took it to the studio and I played that song, and that's that's what I was looking for. The interesting thing is,
Mhm.
the jumbush is really like a poor man's oud.
Mm.
It's a relatively inexpensive instrument, not
Mm.
particularly well made, not very respected,
Mhm.
but I didn't know any of those things.
Mhm.
And here I am in RCA studios, incredible microphone. I mean, the jumbush was never treated with such respect. And they got
Yes.
such a beautiful sound. And that recording was released around the world because RCA is released everywhere.
Mhm.
And eventually, the Jumbush company in Istanbul called me up and
Mhm.
asked me to send them a picture of myself signed, because they said that their sales are going crazy. Now all the oud players are also playing Jumbush. You see, sometimes ignorance is the best thing. I did not know that that's not a very high class instrument.
Yeah.
I just thought it sounded beautiful, and there you go. So it was a great experience.
Interesting. We will listen to it now.
Great.
Ara, I think this brings me to my belief that uh, music is always superior to the lyrics and the words. And this is an example that we listen to now. where you have a piece being sung in 12 languages, which means wherever the lyrics used, the melody is always superior. And another evidence is maybe the opera, where it is sung, but nobody knows what's being sung, maybe for the
Right,
generation.
right.
How do you see that?
Yes, I do believe that uh, language, spoken or sung language, can
Mm.
be a wall.
Mhm.
Um, if we use it that way, it can be something that separates us.
Mhm.
Uh, Music doesn't have that issue.
Mhm.
And actually, it's to further that point, it was one of my goals
Mhm.
is to bring the oud to parts of the world that think it's some kind of a Muslim instrument or an Arab instrument, and we're not interested in that. I wanted to bring the fact that there is no there's no limitation to any instrument. There's only
Mhm.
limitations of the human being.
Mhm.
And that's why on my first Night Ark record, I also recorded a Beatles song, Blackbird,
Mm.
because I thought if they listen to the Beatles song, but an oud playing the melody,
Mhm.
now we can get them. Now they like the sound of the instrument. Who doesn't like the sound of that instrument? Come on. So it was actually one of my goals is to make the beauty of these instruments more universal. The Arab world, the Turkish world, the Armenian world, the Greek world, we know these instruments. It's
Mhm.
nothing new. For that
Mhm.
part of the world, I wanted to bring the sense of Western harmonic color to the makam system.
Mhm.
Because as you know, traditionally, makam music does not have harmony.
Right.
Harmony is a Western European uh, concept.
Yes.
Well, I'm born in America. Harmony is part of how I grew up. How
Mhm.
do you bring harmony to
Mm.
microtonal makam music without offending either one?
Yes.
This has been uh, my my work,
Mhm.
trying to enhance both, bring harmonic color to the makam system, bring microtonal music to harmony.
Yeah.
Um, eh, this is one of my ultimate goals, to
Mhm.
make the instruments more loved by people who don't know them.
Mhm.
Certainly to bring the time signatures
Mm.
that are unique to our world to the rest of the world, and to blend, but in a way that enhances both. You know,
Mhm.
in the 1950s, there was Yehudi Menuhin and Ravi Shankar, East
Mhm.
meets West, and
Yes.
they would take turns playing, and then the other one would play. And it was a beautiful meeting of cultures, but it did not create something new. It was just very polite. Okay, now you play. Okay, now I'll play.
Yes.
I wanted to I wanted to blend and create another possibility
Mhm.
that these cultures can mix. But to do that, you have to be respectful and aware of both.
Yeah. Mhm.
I don't like when a Middle Eastern traditional folk player says, I'm going to play jazz now. You cannot just play jazz. You have to study jazz.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
I don't like when a rock player says, I'm going to play some microtonal modal music. No,
Mhm.
you have to study that. You have to
Yeah.
know about it before you do it.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Interesting. How about another selection from your work, Master?
sure. For Alexis. For Alexis.
Okay, we'll listen to it. Can you tell us about it a bit?
Sure.
Mm.
Um, I had a Assyrian friend call me, and he said that his daughter plays violin, but she wants to learn the oud. So I went over to her house. She was very young, very shy. And I looked at her and I said, honey, tell me the truth. Do you want to learn the oud, or your father wants you to learn? And she said, no, I want to learn. I said, okay, bravo, I will teach you. Because she already read music and played violin, which is fretless, I thought, oh, this is going to be fine. I gave her a very simple piece. I showed her where the notes lie on the fingerboard of the oud. I came back the following week and she played it perfectly. Oh, okay. So I gave her something difficult. I came back the following week. She played it perfectly. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I gave her something extremely difficult. I came back the following week. She sat there and played it perfectly. I said, oh my, what am I going to do with this kid? So I said, honey, what is your favorite makam? And she said, Karjiar. I said, oh, okay. I said, what is your favorite usul, rhythmic mode?
Yeah.
She said, Karshilama, 9/8. I said, okay, honey, okay. So the following week I came back, I wrote that piece for Alexis. Her name is Alexis.
Interesting.
And I tried to make it difficult because I'm trying to challenge her.
Yeah.
Adil, the following week, she played it perfectly. So that's for Alexis.
Interesting. We'll listen to it.
Great.
Yeah. Ara, you told me about the intervention of brain on the musician playing. Would you please expand on that a bit?
Sure. I've been on stage and in studios in front of a microphone countless times.
Mm.
I can never guarantee that I'm going to play well.
Mm.
But those times that I have played well, and when I say played well, I mean played inspired and played things I've never played before, and played something that, oh, I hope they recorded that. I want to listen to that. Let me see, what did I do? Those times that that happened was always when I was unconscious, not aware, more like I said before, an observer rather than in control. Now, I want to give you an example. Many years ago in Thessaloniki, Greece, they had what was called the first international meeting of the oud, where they selected 12 oud players from around the world, each one representing a different country, for 3 days of solo recitals and master classes, which meant 4 solo oud players each night for 3 nights. They put me, the last one, on the last day. You cannot imagine. You know, usually when you go somewhere to play, if I'm the oud player, I'm the best oud player in that room, because the other oud players are doing their own concerts.
Yes.
But that weekend, 11 of us would be sitting in the front row, and then of course hundreds of students, etc., in the back.
Yeah.
And one guy, one poor guy, sitting looking at the 11 great oud players like, okay, go ahead, play now, let's see.
A victim.
Oh my, terrible, terrible. And they put me on last, on the last day. Now, I have never asked God to help me with something like that. I only ask God to help people who need help.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, I was in my dressing room, and in the dressing room, there was a speaker so you could hear what was going on the stage. And the one just before me was a great player from Tunisia. And he's playing things I've never imagined were possible. And I'm thinking, what am I going to play? Oh,
Yeah.
And I remember saying, this is so personal, but I remember saying, dear Lord, let me just represent myself. I hope I can just represent myself. So I went on the stage. And when I started to play, I remember thinking, okay, use this finger and you're going to play this maqam, and then remember you're going to go into that. And when I first started playing, it was not what I wanted. And so I just shut my brain off. I just stopped what I was thinking. And when I stopped thinking, that's when the music started to happen. It was a very valuable lesson.
Mhm.
Again, it doesn't guarantee that it's going to work, but
Yeah.
for sure, if you're thinking, it's not going to work. So
Mhm.
that's why I conclude that the brain can be the great enemy of music.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you hit into the overthinking and maybe interfering with our nature or something.
Yes,
Like if we think about walking while we walk, maybe we fall, or
right,
maybe
right.
as we talk, right?
Beautiful, beautiful,
Yeah,
bravo.
yeah. Also, Master, you mentioned once about playing for oneself versus playing to the audience. Would that make a difference?
Yes, I have to confess, and I hope it's not misunderstood,
Hmm.
that I only play for myself and I
Hmm.
only write music for myself.
Hmm.
And it's not because I need to feed my ego.
Hmm.
Rather, it's because I don't understand anybody.
Hmm.
I don't understand my wife. I don't
Hmm.
understand my children. I don't understand anybody because they see the world from their own unique perspective.
Hmm.
I suppose it's the same thing with music. I don't hear what
Hmm.
anybody else hears.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean I'm right or wrong or that I hear better or worse. It's just I have a unique perspective on what I hear.
Yeah.
So all I could offer you is my perspective. If
Hmm.
I try to understand what you want to hear, I'm going to become confused and not know what to do.
Hmm.
So I play for myself.
Hmm. And that may be your own taste, because we always attribute or maybe connotate an artist or a musician with an ego, a very unique thing about the eye
Mhm,
of the person.
mhm.
And maybe the liking of the person or the liking of that ego, that particular artist, will automatically, communicate to the audience.
Yes,
Mm.
yes,
Mhm.
yes,
Maybe I'm saying it close to what you are trying to.
yes.
Yeah.
You are. I mean, like I said, we
Mm.
we present. We no, we offer
Mm.
who we are
Yes, yes, yes.
musically.
Interesting. Interesting.
It's just an offer. You
Hmm.
you like it, you don't like it, but this is it. Yeah.
Hmm. Master, you have learned the music and the way you told us about since the childhood and in a family of musicians, let's say. And at the same time, you were trained academically and you played the organ for 45 years in the church. Uh, can we say that the academia is not doing any good for the musicians today, or the other way around from your experience?
I would not go as far as saying that. And actually, I will tell you a story about my own academic life, which
Mhm.
I hope you'll find interesting. Um,
Mm.
in the earlier days, uh, there was no school for jazz, certainly no school for Middle Eastern music, for sure, in this
Yeah.
country.
Yes.
But now, with the advent of technology and internet, and I mean, we can learn anything at any time.
Mm.
And I don't like to critique
Mm.
people or systems, but
Mm.
because for me it's so important to discover your unique personality, not only
Mhm.
in music but in life, I would just caution those who concentrate on academia
Mm.
to remember that the goal is not to achieve a certain technical level,
Mm.
but rather to discover who you are.
Mhm.
And at times, academia does not have that priority.
Mm.
And maybe it's too much to ask of them,
Mhm.
because if there are 30 students, how can you concentrate on 30 different, uh,
Mm.
personalities and trying to have them each discover maybe it's too much to ask, but That's why the individual should, I believe, should remember that as being the ultimate goal. Now, when it was time for me to go to university after I graduated high school, of course, I wanted to go to a music conservatory. Well, my parents, who are very supportive and loving, of course, were concerned about, what are you going to do with your life? Okay, you go to a conservatory. What are you going to study? You're playing the oud. It's a classical, Western classical concert. What are you going to do? And then what, after you graduate, what are you going to do? How are you going to make a living? Of course, typical musicians, we're not thinking of that. We're only concentrated on learning more music.
Yeah.
Well, my parents agreed to allow me to audition to some really good Western classical conservatories. What am I going to audition? I took piano lessons. I was not, Fadil, I was not a classical pianist, but I learned the very minimum to allow me to at least audition. Now, don't ask me why. I still don't know why. Maybe it's fate, but I took my oud with me to the audition. Maybe, you know how the child sucks its thumb for comfort. Maybe that was my blanket, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went into the room. There was the piano faculty sitting there, very serious, stern. Okay, play your Baroque piece. I started to play my little Bach something two-part invention. You know, after 3 measures, they know. They stop. Okay. Okay, play your classical piece. I had a little Clementi sonatina. After 2 measures, stop. Ugh. Do you have anything from the Romantic period? Yes, sir. I have Chopin. Okay, play. Maybe 1 measure. Stop. It was terrible. They knew I'm not. So they asked me a very embarrassing question, because your audition can be 20 minutes. After 5 minutes, I'm done. So they asked me, young man, why did you apply to audition here? And I said, sir, music is my life. I want to learn more music. Young man, what music is your life? Certainly not this music. I said, no, sir, but my cultural music. And they saw that I had that weird shaped instrument.
Yeah.
They said, well, look, you have a few minutes. Why don't you just play for us? Okay.
Yeah.
Fadil, this is like a fantasy story, but it's true. I'm playing Taksim. I'm playing Taksim for these Western classical pianists.
Which maqam?
Yeah, you know, like Hijaz, I'm playing. Now, the good part was, they said to me, okay, yes, you have music in you. And I said, I want to learn more. I really want to. Okay. So I left, and my parents asked me, how did it go? I said it was a disaster. A month later, I got the letter in the mail. Not only they accepted me, but they gave me scholarship.
Wow.
Mom, Dad, I'm going to the conservatory. They said, okay, congratulations, but we insist you major in music education. So you become a teacher. So at least we know that you can make money when you graduate. Yeah. Okay. Fadil, after 2 weeks or 3 weeks of music education, I hated it. I did not want to teach or learn how to teach. I wanted to learn how to compose and to perform and to learn the history. So I hope I'm not going on too long. It's actually an amazing story.
It is a very interesting story. Please carry on.
Okay.
Yeah.
I went to the dean's office, the president of the school.
Mhm.
I thanked them for accepting me because I was their little experiment. I was not the typical, actually, that university, it's called Hart College of Music.
Mhm.
Their strong point is opera.
Mm.
So I was like 1 in a million experiment for them. They never did anything like this.
Mhm.
And I knew that, and I thanked them. I said, thank you for allowing me to come here, but I hate music education. And they said, hey, we took a big chance on you, because I said, I want to leave.
Mm.
They said, no, 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 no. What do you want to do?
Mhm.
I want to study. I don't want to be a teacher. I want to be a composer. I want to be a player, a performer.
Yeah.
This, I don't believe, ever happened in America. They said, okay, go back to your dormitory, write up a 4-year program,
Mhm.
the courses you want to take, and you can take music courses in other universities within an hour from here if we don't have it.
Mhm. Wow.
Academia, they don't do things like this, at least not in this country.
Mhm.
But this was a unique situation. I went back to them with a 4-year program with many courses, many credits, not
Mhm.
something easy, a lot
Yeah.
of work.
Mhm.
They accepted it
Mhm.
and put a new program in their computer, Oud major.
Oh,
It's the first and only one in America.
wow.
Now, my senior recital, I
Mm.
played the Oud. And I got a degree, not that they taught me. I did all independent study, of course. But
Mhm.
of course, I composed and I did my compositions and my performances. But it's a unique and incredible story of academia taking a chance on somebody who did not fit the pattern. And
Mm.
they allowed me to be who I am. And
Interesting.
yeah, and I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of what they did for me.
Mhm. This is very interesting if we compare it to the mainstream or
Right,
the industry
right.
education that we see today. This is
Yeah.
very interesting.
This story that I've told you, I've
Mhm.
told many times because it's so important to who I became.
Mhm.
Nobody can believe it. They never heard of academia doing anything like that for anybody. So I
Mhm.
feel I'm very, very fortunate. In other words,
Mhm.
you cannot tell your kids to hope something like this will happen because it probably won't.
Yeah, yeah, it's very rare to happen,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
nowadays. Uh, what's the typical outcome from academia? Like if a musician graduates from the mainstream academia, typical
My own
outcome.
my own experience, and again,
Mm.
this is not meant to be critical.
Mm.
My own experience was that the music conservatory did not teach me music. I had
Mhm.
music in my blood.
Mhm.
It taught me a common language, terminology, how to
Mhm.
communicate my thoughts with other people, a common language.
Mhm.
Um, and for that, I'm very grateful because now if I write a piece, I know how to notate it, the
Mhm.
phrasing, the dynamics, tempo, et cetera, and I can then send that to somebody and they can read it. There's,
Mhm.
it's not like, okay, listen, let me play. It's like this. There's a very rapid way of communicating, and I learned that from academia, for which I'm very grateful.
Interesting. Ara, let's go for another picking of your own music with the audience.
Okay, uh, let's play a piece called American Gypsy.
Mhm. And would you please talk about it?
Sure. I had a very dear friend. He was an Armenian clarinet player,
Mm.
And he loved Turkish gypsy clarinet, that style.
Yeah.
He was born in New York, and he spent his life playing that style or trying to play that style. And a couple of years ago, he became quite ill, and my thoughts were with him and his family, and this melody came to me. And I recorded it, and I sent the recording to him, and his wife played it for him, and she told me it was the last thing that he heard. And when he died, she asked me to go to the burial and play it as they were putting the body into the ground, because he loved it. So I called the piece American Gypsy in honor of him.
Interesting. We'll listen to it. Ara, I know that you are having students and you do teach some music and some of the instruments you have. So let's talk about this experience. Let's talk about students, about what you teach them, and so on.
Sure. I can tell you that for years, I rejected students, not because I felt above them, but because I did not feel qualified. I felt I was a student. And also the way I learned was very unconventional. And I did not want to be responsible for teaching anybody the wrong thing or bad habits, etc.
Yeah.
However, a young boy, I think it was about 8 years old, saw me perform in New York in a concert. And he started bugging his parents that he wanted to learn the oud from me. So his parents called me and I said, does he read music? No. Does he have an oud? No. Well, I said, he's physically too small to play this big instrument. And I teach with notes, or I would teach with notes if I had a student. So call me in a few years after he's bigger. Meanwhile, let him study piano and learn how to read music. They told this to him. He did not accept their answer. He kept bugging his parents. They called me apologetically. They said, would you speak to him? I said, okay. So I went to their house. I had an oud with me. He was sitting on the couch and his feet were not touching the ground because he's too small. And before he could say anything, I put the oud in his hand. I wanted him to see that this is too big for him. But instead of him being uncomfortable, he took it and he looked at me and said, okay, what do I do? I said, oh boy. He really wanted it. And you know, Fadil, when I looked at him, he reminded me of myself when I was a little boy. Nothing was going to stop him. Music was in him already.
Yeah.
We can either nurture that or we can suppress it. So at that moment, I decided, well, he's 8 years old. I know a little more than him. I should show him what I know. And that was the beginning of my teaching. I got him a keyboard so that I could teach him harmony. I taught him how to read music, and I taught him the makam system and the oud. And so help me, after a year and a half, maybe 2 years of lessons, I would bring a 3-page Abdul Wahab overture. He would look at it and he would play it from beginning to end. He became my first and my best student, to the point where there were times where I hired him to play the oud and I would accompany him on keyboard.
Interesting.
So after I started with him, I could not say no to others, and more people started asking, you know, for lessons. Each one of them had a different ability, came from a different culture. I mean, I had imams and rabbis and priests. I had girls and men. I had children and elderly. I mean, I had, and each one of them wanted something else, or they had different abilities. So I don't have a method other than seeing who is the student, what is their ability, what do they want to achieve, and try to help them achieve that.
And you do one-to-one teaching?
One-to-one, yes.
And you rely on the scores or the sheet music, right? You write them and you prepare them tailored for the students.
I have, on my computer, I have written out, without exaggeration, certainly hundreds, if not a couple of thousand pieces. not my pieces, but like of the makam classical repertoire
Mm.
and folk repertoire and everything.
Mhm.
And my method is to, if there's a recording of the composer
Mm.
playing the piece,
Mhm.
that's what I transcribe with the assumption that the composer knows the correct way it should be played. If
Yes.
the composer did not record it, I try to find an early recording because songs change as the generations change. I try to go to the most original possible, and then we can discuss any changes that may have happened in the song, but at least as a foundation, I go back to an early version.
Interesting. And what's your objective with each student? Do you teach them to play a song that they wanted, or do you infect them with the principles of, you know, owning their own individuality, understanding themselves, whatever you described earlier today?
Well, because most of my students are more of the beginner's stage,
Hmm.
it's not time to find your individual identity.
Mhm.
For those who are more advanced,
Mhm.
yes, then I start to push
Mm.
what is unique about them and to try
Mhm.
to get them to concentrate and develop that part.
Yeah.
But for the beginners, because most of them are adults who
Mm.
work hard during the week, and this is something that they always wanted to learn, sort of
Mm.
as a relaxation, not something they're going to do for a living.
Yeah.
I don't force them to do an hour of scales and studying and practice. I try to get them to start playing songs that they know and like,
Mhm.
to keep the love of the music with them. And I don't want it to be a chore.
Mhm.
For those who take it more seriously,
Mhm.
then yeah, then I'm going to push them harder, sure.
Mhm. And what is a good practice session for a musician? Let's say your students. You talked about yourself earlier about practice.
Yeah, what I suggest to my students
Yeah.
is that they realistically schedule a time for their practice every day.
Mhm.
That should not be changed.
Mhm.
It can be before they take a shower in the morning. It could be after dinner.
Mm.
Uh, but whatever it is, it should be consistent so that they don't have to remind themselves, oh, it's now 8 o'clock. It's time for my practice. I practice 30 minutes.
Mm.
That's what I do. Okay, fine. Then you do that 8 to 8:30.
Mhm.
But I found that it's much better to practice every day the same time,
Mm.
even if it's a short time, rather than an hour on Monday, but nothing on Tuesday.
Mm.
So to achieve faster, you should be
Mm.
consistent and schedule your practice time. This is when I practice the oud.
Mhm. Interesting. And what is the session like for a good practice? Do they have to follow certain things like scales or certain repertoire or technique or whatever?
I'm not the conventional teacher. I don't have a method, but what
Mm.
I always emphasize is don't play what you know how to play.
Uh-huh.
Go to the part that is difficult or you're not playing well. Spend
Mhm.
your time fixing that.
Mhm.
You'll feel very good about yourself if you play the beginning of the piece that you know how to play, but the
Mm.
end you cannot play. Start by playing the end. If you practice the end and you get it, now you could feel good and play the whole piece. The way to
Mm.
spend your time is on your weakness, not what you can already do.
Interesting. Interesting.
And by the way,
Mhm.
we develop custom exercises. If
Mm.
one of my students, if one of their fingers is particularly weak,
Mhm.
okay, let's attack that weakness. Let's make a trilling exercise, just making you practice to make that finger stronger.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one story. When I was preparing for my auditions at the university, and I was studying with a very strict German piano teacher. And I remember I was playing the Chopin piece, and there was a point in the piece where the right hand had to trill 2 notes, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, very fast.
Yeah.
And I was trilling terribly. And he said, "Stand up." So I got up, and he sat down, and he started to demonstrate. Fadil, he was trilling like a machine. It was, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And he was using these 2 fingers, the 2 weakest fingers.
Yes.
Now he had his whole hand to use, but he was using his 2 weakest fingers. So I said, "Pardon me, master, may I ask you, why are you using your 2 weakest fingers?" And he said, "My boy, none of my fingers are weak." I said, "Oh, okay. Bravo, okay." I understood what he meant.
Yes.
So getting back to the oud lessons, I want to maintain their love and their desire to play. I don't want it to be a chore, but I also want them to progress. And the way to progress is to attack your weakness.
Interesting. Master, your way of learning the oud and the Eastern kind of instruments was never been under an official teacher or instructor. And you told me once that people might criticize you for the way you hold the oud or the postures and so on, while we just hear beautiful sound, beautiful execution.
Well, yes, like I said, because I didn't have the teacher, I'm not holding the pick correctly. I'm not sitting properly. I'm crossing my legs. Oh, what is that? I'm using the wrong fingers. I'm using my thumb. All of these things are taboo.
Yes.
But you know what? I will share with you a story. There is the great jazz trumpet player, Louis Armstrong. Have you heard this name?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
He practically invented jazz himself. He was an orphan. He was in an institution for children. And to keep him out of trouble, they gave him a trumpet to keep him busy. He could not read. He could not write. Okay? Now, Richard Strauss had written a book of instrumentation, which is a book for composers about all the instruments in the orchestra. So if you're a composer, let's say you're a violin player, but you want to write for flute some part, you have to know what is the lowest note, what is the highest note, what is easy on the flute, what is impossible on the, it's a book of instrumentation. Okay. In that book, for the trumpet, they had defined the lowest note and the highest note. And they had written, if you write in the upper register, the higher register, you cannot ask the players to play for a long time because their lip will crack. It's too difficult. They can go up, but they cannot stay up, for example.
Yeah.
Well, this Louis Armstrong, as a little boy, not only he didn't read that book, he couldn't read. Nobody told him the limit of the instrument. So you probably see where this story is going.
Yes.
When he was a little older, he was on the river boats where they would go up and down the Mississippi River playing jazz music. And he was playing all night in the upper register and an octave higher that wasn't in the Richard Strauss book.
Yeah.
The later editions of that Strauss book, because of that illiterate black orphan, Louis Armstrong, they had to redefine the limits of the instrument. This is, to me, this is fantastic.
Yes.
If you're not taught what you cannot do, maybe you just do it.
Yes. And maybe that's the case with the old masters before we get into institutionalized, thought process or education or so on. The, the way we hold the pick or the way we hold the violin or maybe the
Yes.
kemenche
Yes.
is whatever experience led
Yes.
the player or the musician.
Yes. Yes.
But
Yes.
later on, these are conveniences or maybe conventions,
Right. Right. Right.
or maybe we call them a sort of convention wisdom. But it doesn't
Right.
mean that we have to stick to it because our hands are different sizes, right,
Right.
master? And
But
all and so on. Yeah.
your teacher should allow you to explore what
Mhm.
seems natural to you.
Yeah, Ara, I think Dawood is calling. So can we hear some Oud playing
I
with
would be
our?
very happy. Very happy. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Allah, Allah, Allah. Bravo. So
Thank you so
beautiful.
much. Thank you so
That
much.
was a sort of Husseini, maybe, right?
You're saying it exactly right. Yes.
Interesting. Interesting. And this is the sort of Armenian, maybe common flavor.
That's right. That's right.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Master. Uh, Ara, maybe it's good to mention your records that you have and how is it accessible or reachable by the audience, and maybe mention the website or other mediums that people can reach you and your
Thank
music.
you.
Mm.
before I tell you that, let me thank you in particular. You know, musicians have always needed angels in their lives to help them because we're so focused and concentrated on our music that the other aspects of the realities of life sometimes get forgotten. So for you in particular, Fadil, that you're reaching out to musicians and asking them about their lives on behalf of all of them, not just the musicians, but everybody you interview. Thank you for your time and your efforts and your humanity in what you're doing. Thank you so much.
Sure, it's my pleasure. Actually, we are learning a lot, and I feel this is a missing part of intellect that we really need today in this era, that we really miss with whatever media is offering us today.
Right.
It's really my pleasure, and I really appreciate the time you availed for this interview.
Thank you again. Regarding access to my music, I think the easiest and best way is www.aradinkjian.com. That's my website, and it has all the information and access. And again, I thank you.
Sure, thank you very much. And I think we should conclude with a final selection of your pieces to conclude this interview with.
Okay, I recorded a song by a great Armenian composer named Onno Tunj with a dear friend of mine singing. Her name is Burcu Yıldız. The piece is called Ahmazi, and it's just oud in voice, and I think it's a great way to conclude.
Interesting. I really thank you again. We will listen to it, and thank you again for your time. It's really a great time. We had a pleasure of seeing your wisdom and experience. We have a lot of things that we discussed that really triggers a lot of interesting insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Fadil. Best wishes.
Yeah, we'll see you soon again.
Thank you.
Kaldırımlara sümbüllü bir yağmur inerdi ve tiz bir kadın sesinde bir devir inlerdi. Titresin bir mum alevinde o eski günler. Bir gümüş çerçeveden seyret yine maziyi. Bir nezaketlince söz duyar da belki o sararmış resmin hayat bulur yeniden. Ah nerede hani ya, nerede hani bir şiir gibi narin ve sevdalıydı geçen o zaman. Ah yanarım yanar, ah yüreğim sızlar, bu bir vazgeçiş mi yoksa ah. Bir hasret ki her sabah gün ağrırken ben dilerim yeter ki gün eksilmeden bir nezaket ince söz duyar da belki o sararmış resmin hayat bulur yeniden. Nerede hani ya, nerede hani bir şiir gibi narin ve sevdalıydı geçen o zaman. Yanarım yanara, yüreğim sızlar, bu bir vazgeçiş mi yoksa? Bu bir vazgeçiş mi yoksa?